Testing, testing.
Hello, testing.
Yep. Hello. Hey guys.
Good morning, everybody. G-Mom. Thanks for tuning into our space today. And we're really excited. We have a couple amazing speakers coming to talk to us, specifically about, some of the topics we've been posting about recently, the blockchain trilemma, and kind of surpassing that using RLNC and Optimum P2P, and how that ties into Ethereum's current scaling initiatives, increased adoption, and what the future of the chain is going to look like. So, welcome Wei Dai and Aryan. Um, they're also two of our backers, and yeah, they're just really knowledgeable guys when it comes to the Ethereum ecosystem and blockchain scaling. So, let's get into it. I'll have everyone introduce themselves. And Wei, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Hey guys. Good to be here. I think we did a space about like 2, 3 months ago, and it's good to be back. Um, and yeah, so my background is technical, and I've been sort of studying protocol design for a number of years, and have been actively investing into infrastructure protocols for the past 3 years. And Optimum is probably one of the most exciting one today yet. And yeah, looking forward to getting into it.
Awesome. Aryan, do you want to remind everyone? I know you've been on our spaces before too.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on, guys. Good to see everyone here. My background is I've been in the space since 2017. I've been with CMT for about 4 years. I work as the head of research here on the investments team, so also technical from a background perspective. Also spent some time on protocol design, and yeah, especially excited for Optimum because of what it brings to kind of thinking about trade-offs when we think about hardware in the decentralized infrastructure space.
Thank you, thank you. And then, of course, we have Kent and Muriel, co-founders. Kent, do you want to? You give a quick introduction just in case there's any new people around.
Absolutely. Happy to go next. My name is Kent, co-founder and COO of Optimum. Been in the space for the past 2.5 cycles since 2018. Mostly wearing VC investors hat, and very excited to jump to the builder side. Been a great journey so far. Muriel, you want to go next?
Yeah, happy to do so. My name is Muriel Medard. I'm a co-founder and CEO. This is a big journey for me. It's something I've been working on for a long time on decentralized coded systems. And it's really a pleasure also to be hosting Wei and Arian, who've been just amazing backers. Okay, back to you, Rob.
All right. Well, I was just here to set up the conversation. Kent, I'll let you kind of take the reins now. Let's get into it.
Perfect. Absolutely. So, as we have two great, great backers of Optimum with us, and they're also, deep thinkers around technical as well as just how Ethereum and all the blockchain have been evolving. I think it's great to tap into their mind and discuss how do we unlock blockchain trilemma, as some of the articles that we've been recently publishing. Recently, we've also seen a couple interesting posts from the Ethereum community. Specifically, there are some discussions around beast mode, right? So turning Ethereum into beast mode is an interesting idea, and we want to also discuss that today, and how we believe that Optimum P2P is a very critical infrastructure to help unleash that beast mode in Ethereum. So, first I want to maybe start with opening up a question to both Wei and Arian to describe a little bit of your understanding of what does it mean by beast mode in terms of Ethereum, and what are some of the challenges that it's facing? Maybe starting with either one.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first here. For me, I think what really got me excited about Optimum and in my mind, what I think of when I hear about beast mode with Ethereum is Ethereum's largely, you know, been a very decentralized network in history, and I think that's part of its appeal. When we think about potential users of Ethereum, something over 1 million, validators on Ethereum today, and so a lot of those validators are going to face challenges when it comes to scaling. Looking at the current gossip solution that we have, and for me, Optimum is just kind of beast mode is really unlocking the ability to scale without this bottleneck, replacing that inefficient gossip with this kind of coded broadcasting solution. And I think that just removes the barrier to entry on that scalability, uh, whilst being able to maintain or compete on performance with the likes of people like Solana. That's what really I think of when I think about beast mode with Optimum.
Yeah, I think you know, I think yeah. So Armin is definitely mentioning the right things on in terms of like Ethereum's competing with Solana, and I think like let's zoom back a little bit, right? If you look at back in the last cycle, like 2020, 2021, during the DeFi summertime, Ethereum was really the only chain that had any form of road traffic, and people paid a lot of fees for it, and that showed two things, right? One was people were willing to pay fee to get transactions on to Ethereum back in 2020 and 2021. And Ethereum had so much revenue, so much protocol revenue, so much fee burn. And the protocol was deflationary after the merge. And so there was transaction demand. But however, right, really, like we had like 20 or 30 TPS, right? And still that's how much we have in Ethereum L1. So the second point is from that is we don't really have a good way to scale the L1. And really, if we had the possibility of like scaling TPS like 5x, 3x, or even like 2x, then I think maybe the landscape would have been a lot different. So that's really what it's all about. When we have limited block space, the only way to deal with transactions that are falling in is to raise fees, right? And this is what every single chain does right now. But really, the way that we should build these chains is if we're hitting a bottleneck, we should increase the bandwidth more, increase a block space, and that's what Optimum allows every single chain to do, especially Ethereum. And yeah, so for me, scaling is not really about just scaling itself. It's actually about reducing fees, and that's what's important.
Both are making great points. Yeah, I think everyone is recognizing Ethereum for a lot of the recent tractions that is coming up. There are a lot of movements, both from on-chain as well as a lot of purchasing and transactions happening in the Wall Street side. So I think it's important to talk about scaling and also recognize why scaling is important right now, and the timing is now, right? As we kind of like dive deeper into that discussion, I think it's important to share a little bit of your thoughts. Wei, maybe I want to start with you. How you think about what makes Ethereum a destination for a lot of economic activities, these days, and how scalability allows it to handle those growth to without slowing down or even getting prohibitively expensive to the point that you were just making.
Yeah, so I guess elaborate on my point, right? So there's basically two parameters. One is how much capacity a chain has, and how much the fees we need to charge to reach some form of equilibrium where we're touching block space. And really the only way that we know how to do that is when block space gets congested, we raise the fees. And this is right EIP 1559. There's usually a target parameter for how much gas in an Ethereum block, and there's talks of increasing that. And the bottlenecks, as Ken alluded to, that we see when we increase Ethereum L1 block gas is that execution wise, all the nodes are still able to keep up. this is a kind of a linear increase in the amount of work. And however, the problem is that when we have bigger blocks, and also especially now with Bobs, the P2P network simply gets very congested. And I think they were running tests. I think it was a year or two back that when we increase the block size by I think 5 to 10x, the P2P network simply just couldn't handle it. And so that's really the bottleneck of scaling Ethereum right now at the moment. Is not really about execution. Execution of the block is not the bottleneck, but it's actually increasing block size without congesting the P2P network. And so in order to scale a system, you have to scale this bottleneck. And for Ethereum, that's really networking, and ultimately P2P is really the solution. And it can be integrated permissionlessly into any validator, which is great. But yeah, that's kind of how I think about scaling Ethereum at the moment.
Great comments. I think what stands out is that I think you mentioned not just about bigger block space, but you also mentioned about blob space, right? BLOB. And when it comes to scaling, I think a lot of people simply jumps to the conclusion of scaling means L2s, right? I think that's one of the interesting myths that I wanted to discuss today. Since you mentioned blobs, I think it's good to maybe clarify a little bit, right? Like when we say scaling, and indeed on the Ethereum, roadmap today, they put scaling the L1 and scaling the L2 as the top two priorities. Maybe we can clarify a little bit of what scaling really means, and where does execution versus networking come into play. Maybe Muriel, you can share a little bit of your thoughts on that point.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And actually, I wanted to first of all reprise a theme that Wei brought up, which is about the fees and congestion, because effectively you can always imagine that if you throw enough money at something, you can have all the throughput you want. You can lay down hardware everywhere, fiber, and so on, but there's a cost to it. And the other aspect about this is that, you know, trying to bring down congestion by raising fees is really a reactive approach. It's not a proactive approach. And some of the recent proposals, such as, for instance, decreasing, say going to from 12 seconds to 6 seconds and so on. And I did a little video that I posted recently on X on this matter. They're helping, but they're really helping in a very, I would say, incremental way. The real aspect here is that if you don't make optimum use of the resources you have in the network, you're basically always going to have bottlenecks which are effectively artificial. And I think maybe if I can just quickly dip into the technology here. I mean, that's basically what optimum P2P, what Mom P2P does, is it's not constraining you. It's not telling you what links you should use or so on. It's just making provably optimum use of whatever resources you have, which means effectively that it will also be as cheap as you want, right? And this is sort of very familiar to many people, whether in theory or in practice. There's this concept of duality, right? It's the same thing for me to say, how can I get the maximum throughput or lowest latency for some price, as it is for me to say, hey, this is the resources I'm willing to provide. This is basically the cost I'm willing to incur. How can I get the lowest latency or the highest throughput for that cost? But I'd like to hear other folks' thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think Way's points and your points are kind of some of the main reasons. So that we were able to get so excited about Optimum. So one of the issues that we see is on the L1, all the attempts at making or scaling the L1's capacity or throughput do end up having some form of centralizing force on the validator set. And I think if we look at where the bottlenecks exist for both the L1 and the L2, I think it starts to become clear where Optimum is applying its technology. So if we look at the L1, the gossip based P2P is somewhat slow and redundant. And so when we start thinking about things like increasing block size, or even EIP 7782 that's reducing the slot time, it's effective, but it can't be as efficient as increasing the uh, efficiency of that communication itself, that P2P communication. And so that's where RLNC comes in and can, as well as removing that bottleneck or reducing that bottleneck, in doing so also making validation more accessible and kind of pushing back against some of that centralization force that we saw coming from the foundation's own scaling solutions. If we look at the L2, then when we start thinking about execution moving off of the L1, the bottleneck starts to exist in things like data availability, latency, or remote state sync, or even things like sequence of propagation. And so Optimum's solution is coming in at a different layer, but fundamentally it's increasing that access to the data, reducing the latency. So it's fundamentally, solving the bottleneck through a similar sort of solution, even though it's at a different part of the stack. And obviously DRAM can come in the future as well with things like faster state reads, but it's ultimately that data propagation piece that is being made more efficient that is applicable both at the L1 and the L2 from what we see.
Great comments. So from what I have heard, just to summarize, a couple of viewpoints so far, scaling really means, a couple things that need to happen at the same time. And it's at the end of the day, shifting bottlenecks, right? Um, Years ago, scaling in terms of execution was the bottleneck for Ethereum. As we have done a great job as a Ethereum community of like scaling execution, now the bottleneck has shifted to scaling the networking, because you need to not just do computation on a single node quickly enough. You also need to make sure those changes are reflected and synced up in other nodes quickly enough. And with the level of decentralization that Ethereum has, which is one of its core strengths, it poses a challenge in achieving that sync up speed. And Optimum P2P as a fast propagation network helps Ethereum to counter that challenge as it scales further with higher throughput, and that scalability actually helps lowering the transaction fees, which will make the user experience on Ethereum much better. So I think that's a great discussion. I want to switch gear to, or rather deepen our discussion into this idea of a beast mode. Right. So maybe I can invite either Wei or Ariane to elaborate a little bit of your interpretation of that particular term, beast mode, and what it's trying to do.
Um, yeah, so let's see, right? So what problems do we have for scaling Ethereum or any chain for that matter? One is how many transactions we can get in per block, and one is like how fast the block gets produced. And so I think oftentimes we kind of don't think about the block time as much, but really is a very important parameter, right? So Bitcoin was at 10 minutes per block. Ethereum's at 12 seconds per block, and some other chains are reaching under doing like more than 2 blocks a second. And that parameter is actually very, very important, especially because Ethereum also has kind of two different ways of scaling. One is L1 itself, and one is via L2s. And L2s actually really hugely benefit from faster L1 blocks because of interoperating sending messages between L2s. and that requires messages to be posted, like, to L1 and then finalized on L1. So for the other L2 to pick it up. And so reducing the block time, increasing block size, and will effectively help scale the L1 and scale the L2s, right, in terms of blob size, and helping with UX, like how easy it is to transfer between L2s, or even, right, thinking about abstracting away from the notion that there's even L2s, and we simply send messages from one L2 to another, just like there are depths on the L1. And so beast mode to me is continuously improving on all three fronts, reducing latency with the recent DIP on that, increasing throughput, and yeah, and in the process of doing so, we'll actually effectively ramp up UX to the level that Ethereum has not seen before. And by the way, this is not just for it's not just a thing that's happening in Ethereum. It's really something that's happening to every single chain. And Ethereum had the resources to do it, so there was not really, a solution that really improved on the P2P networking stack. And if Ethereum cannot do it, other chains cannot do it. And ultimately, P2P is kind of the only solution that's plug and play there. But I'll hand it off to either Arian or Muriel here to elaborate more.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with you here. I mean, to think about what does Ethereum beast mode mean? I think, maximizing throughput, minimizing latency, while also preserving that decentralization. And I think that also preserving decentralization is the trickiest part. And obviously what the Trilemma has naturally kind of traded off in history, at least from what we've seen. And in the solutions that we've seen to different parts of the stack, it's been through things like rollups, it's been through things like DA layers, it's been through things like clients, and Optimum's neither of those. And it's, I think, tackling that longer tail of latency that is making scaling at the networking layer so difficult, because Ethereum has a bit of an invisible ceiling in the sense that the gossip-based propagation is somewhat redundant and unreliable. And so even if we increase the blocks and reduce the block times, the tail latency for some of the validators in actually syncing becomes that gating factor. And so it must under-deliver on performance to maintain that decentralization, to preserve the safety. And so it means that it's kind of bottlenecked. Even no matter how much it scales the clients or the consensus itself, because of network propagation. But if we enable that longer tail of latent validators to be able to plug into the coded kind of fragments that RLNC provides, it means that latency is far less of a input to determining their latency, because of the fact that they can construct their own blocks without using gossip. Sorry, construct their own kind of information without using gossip. So you don't need every validator to receive that block. And so that tail validator individual latency becomes less of a input to that equation of, how much can Ethereum scale without having to then fall back on centralization. And I think that's what's exciting me. It's that it's an impartial technology provider that incentivizes every validator to use it, because it's reducing its bandwidth requirements and also increasing its ability to participate regardless of where it sits in terms of topology of the network.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Aaron and Wei said. And I think that this aspect around the decentralization, centralization, which really touches on the topic of today's conversation around the trilemma. Decentralization is actually not per se a force against speed. And this may seem extremely counterintuitive, but it's only when you try to communicate in an uncoded way that you need to do a lot of orchestration, and the centralization is basically there for the orchestration. when you use RLNC, randomly network coding, that Aaron just mentioned, and which is a foundational technology for Optimum, when you use that, you actually get optimum throughput and optimum latency without the need for orchestration. And that really actually works into scaling for the following reason. If you want to have a centralized system, you need to give the controller, the central controller, a lot of information so that that controller can do that orchestration. And eventually, what will happen is that the entire system will crumble under the weight of the information that the central controller needs to do the orchestration. So, this decentralization is not just a philosophical stand, it's actually a requirement for something to be able to scale, for a network to be able to scale. Imagine if you had a single controller trying to control all of Web 2. It would be impossible. All the information that's carried would basically just be nodes telling other nodes what other nodes are doing. And basically, that's what happens if you try to stick with centralization. So the decentralization aspect is, as I said, not just philosophical, but it's needed. Uh, but in order to make the decentralization work, you need a technology, a protocol which is inherently decentralized. And to be decentralized and be efficient, you need to do coding. You need to do a representation of data, which is much more uh, basically versatile and robust than just making multiple copies.
Those are some of the great points. I think it's important to understand, what is really blockchain trilemma, and our team has published our, a latest article on the understanding of the trilemma and how to demystify it, and how to really understand blockchain trilemma. And our team will drop the link to that article again in this chat, so watch out for that. I would like to, hear a little bit more, maybe from Wei again, on your understanding of what it means to decentralize to scale, right? So maybe you can help unpack Muriel's, words again for our listeners here. What it really means to decentralize to scale, and why does Optimum's technology and products help enable that?
Yeah, so I think decentralization is really a problem that can be discussed for any, in association with any other property. So, for example, just decentralized block production or decentralized block attestation, or decentralized block propagation, and really, the way I think about it is what Ethereum wants to do is decentralize block attestation, and that requires every single leader when proposing a block to get that block to all the voting validators as fast as possible. And currently, right, uses quite naive gossip, and the effect of that is there's a lot of wasted bandwidth. And so, when we think about a network that effectively overlays on top of the existing internet. So if you think about like what's happening actually when you send, when I'm speaking right now, when this voice message is reaching to all of your devices, there's a series of intermediaries, these networking boxes that relays this packet probably to a server that X has, and then it multiplexes and then replicates that data and then to send it to everyone else, right? And that process currently is actually quite centralized, and this is a repeating pattern in all the Web2 services, unless they use peer-to-peer networking, which oftentimes they actually don't do. And this is the exact same thing happens on a blockchain, and that's where actually having the most decentralized distributed network will help, which is effectively that every single network peering point, we want an optimum node so that the message going into it can be very succinct, and the message coming out of that node can be more than one copy, right? So in effect, if when we have this broadcast message pattern, we can leverage kind of maximum bandwidth every single link and be able to reach many nodes in the network. And for that, we really have to exploit the fact that there's this really well connected nodes. And typically, right, these are run by ISPs. These are run kind of by data centers, and they need to have nodes that replicate this data. And this is why Optimum needs to be decentralized. Optimum P2P benefit from many nodes. And on that front, there's no conflict. We decentralize the multicast network. We help Ethereum scale, and also right any network besides Ethereum.
Yep. I like that way. Always bring it back to the point that Optimum is chain agnostic, by nature, and we're using Ethereum because it's one of the chains that could use a lot of scaling, but really the product itself is not limited to just scaling Ethereum. I think that's a good great point to re-emphasize. And we spent some time talking about um, the problem with the trilemma and how it's a myth and why decentralized to scale work, and the meaning of decentralization. But it comes back to one point that I think a lot of users has in their mind, which is, why is decentralization important anyway, right? Why should I care as a user as long as my transaction is fast and cheap? Can I just not care about decentralization? Although that's one of the defining identity of this industry, but it seems that it's evolved to you know an era after 15 years of development that people actually care less about it. Is this just a transitioning moment? Are we going back to caring about it? Do we have to care about it? I want to invite maybe some people, to comment on that. Anyone, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, decentralization, and from a user's perspective specifically, most users don't care, nor should you care. The only well, until it really matters. The only point of decentralization is that it becomes clear how important it is when it's too late. Blockchain systems, I mean, Bitcoin itself is decentralized, and it's part of the reason that I think it's found product market fit so quickly. Is well, already, and it's that censorship resistance. It's the fact that it's access is permissionless, and it's permanent and transparent. But it wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't decentralized, purely because of the political nature of the world. Now, it's important to realize that when Ethereum talks about things like credible neutrality, it's really in that spirit of decentralization. It's that fairness, and that really becomes apparent in the long term user experience. It's through the trust that is gained in, and the long term confidence that is gained in the network, that the rules won't change arbitrarily, or that they won't be held to the whims of some government's political ideology. And so, in a way, decentralizing it from the user experience is kind of future proofing the system. Centralized systems will be able to be fast, but you could argue that inevitably over enough time, they could get bottlenecked by internal governance or political pressure. It's really only through robust decentralization that you can maintain credible neutrality for a long time. And the real and it's a user experience optimization, in my opinion. And the real goal with that is to ensure that you have a system that can be fast, cheap, permissionless, accessible, but then also resistant to change. And that's only really possible through decentralization. I think you can have as many finality gadgets or tools to improve the performance of the chain, but that robustness and resistance to change and credible neutrality is only really achieved through decentralization, in my opinion.
I want to add something to what Aaron said. I completely agree with his points, and he made them beautifully. I mentioned for the cost of centralization in terms of sharing information, right? Because if you're centralizing to control, you need to provide the information to the controller. But the censorship resistance that Aaron mentioned is very important. Um, if people recall BitTorrent, BitTorrent was a peer-to-peer system, uh, and it looked fairly decentralized, but actually it wasn't. The trackers were centralized. So in the places when it was brought down, it's not because, the content was removed from the computers of individuals, it's because the centralized trackers were brought down. So, as Aaron said, it doesn't matter until it does. It doesn't matter until the whole thing is brought down. So true decentralization is necessary for robustness, not just for scaling.
Yeah. So one more point on decentralization, I think, really, there's multiple layers to it, but really at the heart of why we decentralize, decentralization is actually, something that enables a crucial capability, which is that, um, effectively there's financial applications that can be run on decentralized blockchain networks that are autonomous, secure, decentralized, and that would not be labeled as um, a business that will need to seek kind of regulatory licenses. And this is something that's very unique to blockchains, right? Um, and with the recent the Clarity Act might actually pass, and is something that from what I've heard is very likely passing with kind of modifications. And it says that there's kind of two categories of chains. One, decentralized, where there's not really a single company or single entity that's in control of it, and one that's okay, maybe not so decentralized. Um, and the treatment of these tokens with networks is very different. And so that's, I think, at the heart of why we decentralize, is that actually when you have a network that's not operated by one entity, then it's actually we can build financial services, financial systems like exchanges, lending protocols, and payment systems on top of it, where effectively the existing outdated regulation would not apply, and that allows these systems to go way faster and to go to the global audience from day one. And this is in fact what happened with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other protocols. And on top of that, there's security uptime, right? Ethereum was the only system that probably had 100% uptime in the past decade. But I would say that's in some sense less, like in majority of the time, it actually does not matter as much because systems really do not go down. But it really, really matters in the case that other systems, do go offline, which they often do. Every single system probably had experienced some downtime. And so yeah, really the way I think about decentralization is that, and is that we don't have to, we can operate effectively an exchange as a protocol instead of as a company. And another interesting thing is that L2s like Base actually are currently labeled as, right, a decentralized system under this, if they have this voting process to elect the sequencer. And if you look at how Base operates L2, is that they actually take all the revenue, right? And so there's an incentive for businesses to launch Ethereum L2s because they can remain the main source of they can maintain sequencing control and therefore profit from running that L2. And self Ethereum and using Ethereum DA means that they'll actually be decentralized, and it's not kind of operated as a database, but a decentralized chain. Um, and and really that's the heart of decentralization, is this regulatory arbitrage, I would say.
Maybe if I can just add a little bit to this, because again, bringing it back to the trilemma, which by the way is is not a theorem per se. It's sort of a framework and an informal trade-off. I wanted to bring it back a little bit to the sort of the theoretical foundations for this understanding of trilemma, which is the cap theorem. And actually, one of the authors of the cap theorem, Nancy Lynch, is an advisor to our company. It was actually she and I who jointly co-supervised our other co-founder, Kishore Kanwar, CTO, when he was a postdoc. And the CAP theorem is a very, very specific theorem under very tight definitions. And I think that part of the issue around the trilemma is that maybe there was a little bit of misinterpretation of what those definitions were, right? And so I just wanted to put that out there, because we've been saying, well, look, don't worry, you can have, you don't, it's not just that you can have decentralization for scalability, for security, but it actually, you sort of need it. And you might say, well, but how does that jive with what people know and believe? I think it's very much because there was maybe some, misinterpretation of what were, to be fair, extremely technical, maybe even somewhat obtuse definitions. I just wanted to bring that out there. Kent, I want to hear your take on decentralization.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to put it in the vein of the market view, right? And I think, a lot of people participate in crypto because of how exciting it is. And we've seen how Ethereum has been, behaving pretty well on the public market. And as I was browsing through a lot of Twitter and a lot of people were commenting about it, one of the key reasons of Wall Street's apparent pick of Ethereum seems to be its robustness, right? A network that has no downtime for 10 years. And that is not easy. And indeed, behind the scenes, it's decentralization that was the key reason, right? And among many other definition of decentralization, I personally have a little bit of a interesting one, and I wouldn't call it a definition, but it's a way to interpret it, right? That if you control the team, you still cannot control the chain, and that's one of my way of interpreting decentralization, right? For example, right, some of the chains outstanding now that a lot of people use, they have one sequencer. If you control the team, you can actually control that sequencer. You can literally control the chain. In fact, you can probably shut down the chain, right? And for a chain, and that is to answering the question that I was asking a little bit earlier on. Why is it even important? Is because you don't want the chain that you are using shut down the next moment, because someone is capable of doing so, right? And we have all the right reason to trust that the team behind it has no ill intention, and they probably don't. But there could be reasons beyond their individual control, right? That shuts them down, and that goes back to the point of like no single point of failure, etc. So that's one of the reasons why I think decentralization is indeed important. That defines this industry, and I want to bring it full circle back to kind of how we started this conversation in terms of scaling the L1, right? I think it's not complete if we talk about how we scale the L1 and why is it, it's not complete if we talk about how we scale the L1 without talking about why we need to scale the L1. And going back to some use cases, things that users can actually feel and touch and understand what makes a difference when L1 is scaled. So maybe I want to invite either Wei or Arian to chime in and talk a little bit about that.
So, from my perspective, I want to make two comments. Yes, I think it's important to enable the scaling of the L1 that would enable kind of a net new class of applications. But I do think that it doesn't necessarily have to exist on the L1. Optimum allows it to exist on the L1 if that was to be the case. But I think in the context of Ethereum's roadmap and the way that we see things moving in terms of execution, I would expect it to probably uh, help the L2s scale and bring on applications, a new class of applications. So, for example, things like social apps, in-game actions through gamings for gaming applications, micropayments. Now, L2s can settle to the L1, and so their cost floor is defined by L1 gas and blob capacities. And so if the L1 can't handle larger blobs or faster settlement, as a result of, the poor gossip on the L1, then the L2s do become congested and expensive. And so obviously that pushes those types of applications off of EVM L2s. But it's important that the execution would still be occurring on the L2. And, in the future, maybe some 5 year down the road, that's going to be some sort of RISC-V VM, and it's just going to be, proving of ZK batched transactions. But importantly, it's that P2P layer that's still, scaling the type of applications that can exist on the L2 by implementation on the L1, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Wei, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so maybe one thing to add is actually even for rollups, right? Like which Ariel mentioned, when the proposer, when this sequencer is not decentralized, ultimately will still help. And this is because for every single read node, there's oftentimes many thousands of for every single write node, every single proposer, there's might be like thousands of read nodes that's trying to get that data. And the reason for that is because there's if you can read data fast after block is proposed, a lot of these sophisticated market actors like market makers will want to read that as fast as possible and start kind of to either cancel their limit orders or placing orders on other venues, right? And so there's this huge demand for accessing up-to-date market information with very, very low latency. And that's something that TradFi has built a like specialized channels for, right? To have like these private fibers that with multicast that they sell and use for these institutional players, and that's something that we haven't had in crypto, and right, and so it's not just for getting blocks out for attestations, but it's also for getting blocks out to these sophisticated market participants, so that actually the market will become more efficient for the average trader, and so yes, so when we talk about decentralization, yes, it matters a lot, but at the same time, it kind of goes much more beyond that to crypto competing with Nasdaq and with TradFi, in a kind of centralized single sequencer setting.
Thank you very much for the discussion. I want to, maybe invite one or two audience to ask, one or two questions. While we wait for audience to, put in their questions, maybe either by raising hand or by putting some questions in the in this spaces tweet comment. I will go on and ask the kind of the closing question. And again, listeners, thank you for tuning in, and feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or type it in the thread. I'm gonna ask the closing question, which is, you know, how do you imagine Ethereum to be like, 1 year from now, without the bounds of the trilemma, right? Muriel, feel free to go first.
Okay, I'll go first and I'll go fast. Fast. I think that really with unblocking the bottleneck of propagation, it should be just a completely different experience.
I'll be fast as well. Faster, cheaper, and more user friendly.
Yeah, and I like to see every single chain think about using Optimum P2P. I think Ethereum is really just a start. It's the biggest chain, but really the market is much bigger. And yeah, and our North Star is every single digital network will be using Optimum P2P, right? Not just Ethereum. And that's we'll like to see more than 10 chains committed to using Optimum P2P next year.
Amazing. So we will be, watching out for more questions and potentially addressing them in our next call. indeed, we have a community call coming up very soon, this Wednesday. It will happen in our Discord. So tune in. If you have not yet joined our Discord, please do so. We have some interesting sharings every now and then that you probably can't see in the open Twitter updates. So stay tuned. We are also organizing a hackathon in Boston following the ETH Boston on September 14th. So if you're around Boston area, please do get in touch, and we'll be exciting to get you involved in the hackathon. And for any validators who are interested in trying out Optimum P2P, please sign it up on our website. You can find the validator sign up button. We have already onboarded over $20 billion worth of Ethereum TVLs of validators in our Wave 1, Wave 2s. And so we're looking forward to onboard more. So Rob mentioned there is one request. Let's bring it up.
Okay, yeah. DGen Seeker, I see your request. I just invited you to speak if you want to ask us a question.
Hi, DGen Speaker. Or DGen Seeker. Do you want to ask your question? Feel free to unmute. You can click the unmute on the bottom left.
Okay, I also see one from OX Definity. Here, I could bring you up as well.
Well, I see DGen Seeker raised the hand. Maybe if
Yeah.
you can't, if audio setup is not working, maybe just reply underneath the X-Space tweets with the question, and then we can read it out loud for everyone else.
Yeah, that'll work too. I see you raising your hand, but yeah, go ahead and type us.
Okay, GM, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to say something. My question here is regarding the scalability of Ethereum, saying that it is not a constant solution. So, what plan do you have when Ethereum gets more adoption in the future?
That's a great question. Happy to take a first stab. So one thing that's special about Optimum is the point we talk about decentralized to scale. Right? As more people use Ethereum and generate more traffic, it will actually make the chain economics more attractive for validators. And for validators that are running Optimum P2P, it will actually make their validator economics more attractive too for themselves. So it actually forms a positive flywheel. The more validators that are running Optimum P2P, the more scalable Ethereum will become. The more scalable Ethereum it is, the easier and the cheaper and the faster it is for the users, and it becomes a positive flywheel. I think that's a great question to ask. Thank you.
But also on the other side of this, right? I think, like I mentioned, it's not just for Ethereum. I think there's actually an incentive for any chain to integrate this. Also any rollup for the sequencer, right, to propagate a block to all the read replicas. And Ethereum just to start. I think the number of chains, number of networks that integrates up to P2P will for sure increase over the next year. And so that's also how I view it. We're really not contingent on the fact that Ethereum has to take back market share. There'll be more at once, and right that you can think about it. this way also like everything is built on the internet today, and I hope that every single decentralized network will be built on top of the Optimum P2P network.
Just to add to Wei's point, because I think that it's a great question. It's easy to think of it like a solution to scaling that is almost like a patch, but it is foundational infrastructure in a sense. I mean, from a foundational perspective, it is foundational infrastructure because as Ken was just talking about, as the more participants from the validator operator side participate, the kind of memory coded fabric access also increases. And so yes, it's more throughput today, but it's also enabling throughput and scale as a compounding property. So the more participants, the more it compounds, and it's that flywheel that Ken was talking about. And to Wei's point, it really should be multi-chain. And today we think about things like transactions per second on a chain by chain basis. You know, with Optimum in the future, perhaps we'll talk about things like interactions per second across a multi-chain shared programmable memory layer. And it's really those types of framings that I tend to look at Optimum through.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to the flywheel aspect. It's basically that when you have new people enter, they're not just competing with the other people for the same resources. They're actually bringing their own resources. So they're bringing something else to the table. And I think that that's the crucial difference.
Great. Let's get question from one last audience from Dfinity. Feel free to unmute.
Okay, GM everyone. Thank you for having me on this space today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to post my questions through. And I won't take much of your time because actually I have a lot of questions to ask, and I love the speakers so far. They have addressed a major pain points, especially Wei and Ariane. So my question is based on the Ethereum upcoming upgrade. Optimum leverage RLNC to optimize data propagation. With Ethereum upcoming full cycle upgrade in late 2025, which we know is coming, but might be actually postponed due to some stuff that is coming up in which I read about yesterday. So this upgrade actually include peer DAS and Vacu trees. So I've been thinking about this, like how do you foresee RLNC based gossip protocol interacting with and complementing this new base layer scaling mechanism? Because eventually Ethereum is entering beast mode itself. And will RLNC benefits be amplified or potentially made redundant by these native Ethereum improvements?
Yeah, so maybe let me
Thank
repeat
you.
the question since it might be a little bit harder to understand. But yeah, so if I understand correctly, the question is, as Ethereum ships the next upgrades, including pure GDS and things like Oracle trees, data sampling, or other type of features that's on the Ethereum roadmap, how does Optimum play into the upcoming roadmap? Is that correct? Okay, assuming that it is, I think.
Yes, that's
Awesome. Yes, I think Muriel will actually be able to comment much more on actually the synergies of RNC and data sampling. And actually, I recall this conversation that we had actually in ECC. Muriel was explaining how RNC for DA and RNC for propagation actually is very synergistic. Muriel, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to make a couple comments. So maybe let's just wind back a little bit on what DA sampling is. So DA sampling is effectively a way to verify the availability of data, hence the data availability side of it. And the current solutions that are out there, such as EigenLayer or Celestia, use a particular kind of code. Where remember, a code is a recipe for making equations effectively. So it uses a specific recipe, which is a centralized recipe based on codes that have been around since the 1950s, Reed Solomon codes. It uses product, or also called tensor codes, using Reed-Solomon. And that's fine, of course. But really, you're using those equations to form effectively a hash. And this hash is the way to verify that indeed the data is there, that claims to be there. And if you go to RLNC is also a very powerful hash construction. As a matter of fact, it is much more powerful than Reed-Solomon codes in terms of a variety of different metrics that we don't have time to get on in this space. But certainly in terms of its power as a hash, its ability not to be spoofed, for instance, it's much more powerful. Moreover, it is decentralized. So that's definitely extremely, extremely synergistic with what we're doing at Optimum, is to have a decentralized RLNC-based data availability sampling.
All right. We have hit up our scheduled time, and I want to thank our guest speakers today again, Wei and Ariane. Thank you so much for chiming in, and thank you all for listening through this very detailed discussion on why scaling matters and why RNC and Optimum matters in scaling. We will be, hosting our community call this Wednesday. Look forward to seeing you there, and thank you again for chiming in.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Wei and Aryan. And yeah, if you guys have questions that didn't get answered, we'll be doing Q&A on that community call on Wednesday. So join us on Discord. We'll be talking about our testnet roadmap mostly. It'll be a great call. And thank you, everybody. Have a great day.